Apex Legends Season 8 has brought some interesting balance changes to the SMGs. You're probably wondering whether the Vault nerf means it's worth changing to a different weapon, and whether the Alternator buff makes it worth picking up over the R9 or Vault. I'm going to be answering that question today, and taking a look at the 3 unique weapon profiles for the Vault, R-99 and Alternator. I'll be using cold hard facts. I've taken the in-game stats that can be data mined, so we're 100% basing this on stats and there's no human error in any DPS calculations. So first, let's talk about the SMG class and how it fits into Apex Legends. Like many games, the SMGs in Apex have a very high damage per second, but as a trade-off they have limited range and lower magazine sizes compared to the other weapon categories. We all know Apex has a heavy focus on movement, so whilst SMG weapons are limited by range, we can use movement to close that distance quickly and safely. On top of that, you move faster whilst aiming down sights with the SMGs than everything but shotguns and pistols. Because of that, and with the high DPS they offer, SMGs are a very popular weapon choice in Apex. You'll see the vast majority of players picking up an SMG because they're just that good in Apex, but which one is the best in Season 8? In Season 7, it was mostly agreed that the Vault was the best in its class. It had a time to kill just ever so slightly lower than the R-99, but in its defense it had very easy recoil, great bullet velocity and a good damage per shot, which meant far more damage per reload. The Alternator was, well, it was just sitting there idly by as an attachment holder for the R9 or the R301, sorry Alternator. But now in Season 8 the Vault damage has been dropped by 1 from 16 to 15, and the Alternator damage has been increased to 16 from 15. The R99 has remained unchanged. Everything else about these weapons remains the same too. So the first thing to look at is the time to kill. It's not the only stat that matters, but it's a good starting point. Let's start with the Dps King. The R99 has a damage of 11 and a rate of fire of 18. That's its in-game stat that determines how many shots can be fired per second. So it totals at 198 damage per second. This is as good as it gets for a full auto weapon in Apex. That means you'll kill a no armored player in 0.5 seconds and a red Evo player in 1.14 seconds, assuming you don't miss of course. More on that later. The Vault previously had a DPS of 192, so whilst lower than the R99, many people appreciated the larger damage per reload and better recoil control, so they'd pick it up because it didn't make much difference in time to kill. For example, the old 16 damage Vault could level out a red Evo player in 1.18 seconds, just 3.5% slower. But we're all not human aimbots, so you're going to miss, and the larger damage output of the Vault really helped here. However, now the Vault has been nerfed to 15 damage. It's only 1 damage point, so it can't be a massive change, right? Well, its DPS is dropped to just 180. Keep in mind the Spitfire, which people say has a low time to kill, has a 171 DPS. The Vault is now closer to the Spitfire than it is the R99. In terms of time to kill, that means you'll be knocking a red Evo player in 1.25 seconds. That's about 10% slower than the R99. Thankfully, that's not a massive difference, so the Vault isn't off the table yet. However, it is a big enough change that if you can control the recoil on the R99, you may want to reconsider using the Vault as your main SMG. But don't worry, I'll keep explaining more stats and adding comparisons so you can make an informed decision, because even with the nerf, the Vault is still a decent weapon. Now, what about the Alternator? Well, even with the damage buff, the low fire rate of the Alternator really lets it down. You're looking at 16 damage and a fire rate of just 10, which lends the Alternator a 160 DPS, slower than the newly buffed Spitfire. Now, don't throw the Alternator in the trash yet. There are some cases where it can be useful, and we'll get into that as we go along. So the R99 is clearly the DPS King, and it's not so neck and neck anymore, but it's not the only important stat in Apex Legends. Magazine size and overall damage output per reload is very important too, because we don't all hit all of our shots, so which weapon comes out on top here? Well, with the recent balancing changes, we see an almost exact opposite pattern to the DPS values. With no attachments, the R-99 can deal out 220 damage, with purple 297. The Volt has 285 to 390 depending on magazine capacity, and the Alternator has between 304 and 432. This is a little more than the Season 7 Volt stats. Many people would agree one of the Volt's strong points is its high damage per mag, but now the Alternator beats it. So how does this stack up for us? Well, before I can paint a perfect picture, we should have a look at the recoil of these three weapons. The R-99 has such a fast fire rate, which means it kicks up quickly. The recoil itself has more vertical kick and more variance to the Volt. The Volt is just too easy to control, and the Alternator at first glance looks challenging, but it has a unique twist. The Alternator has two alternating barrels, so there's actually two alternating recoils happening. It sort of steps up slightly. It also has the lowest fire rate of the three SMGs, which means it's very easy to react to the recoil as you are firing, even if you've never used the weapon before. In my opinion, the Alternator has the best recoil because of this. Go test it in the firing range at a 40 meter distance and you'll see what I mean. So we have the Alternator having the worst time to kill but best handling stats, and the R-99 with the best time to kill but worst handling stats, with the Volt in between. I think that the Alternator is decent if you are newer to shooters and really struggle to control your recoil, because it's such a forgiving weapon. However, the lower damage output really makes me think it's worth upgrading to the Volt and learning the recoil, because it's really quite easy after just a few minutes practice in the firing range. However, it just doesn't make sense to me personally to use the Volt over the R-99. The R-99 time to kill is a decent step up from the Volt now, and with some practice you can still effectively laser people with the R-99. So if you're up for the challenge, learn to master the R-99's recoil and you won't look back in Season 8. We have so many great mid-range options this season that can accompany the R-99, from the R301 and Flatline, which now have the Anvil receiver, to the powerful and easy to use 30-30 repeater. And let's not forget how easy it is to spam the Spitfire at range, which has a time to kill better than the Alternator and an easy to control recoil. The only reason you wouldn't want to take the R-99 is if you go for a Mastiff or EVA 8, because then you are limiting yourself range-wise a little too much, and in that case you may choose to go for a Volt for the better movement and handling it offers in comparison to the assault rifles. It's a nice stepping stone between the ARs and R-99. Now there's three more stats that I'll include, but I don't think it's really going to play a big picture on how these weapons are rated. Perhaps the most important of these miscellaneous stats is the hip fire spread. Sometimes we need to hip fire, whatever the circumstances are. Sometimes we need to shoot in mid-air as well, and there is inaccuracy when you do that unless you slide on Octane's jump pad first. So, which weapon has the best hip fire and mid-air control? Well, the hip fire on both the Alternator and R9 is basically identical, but because the R9 has a bigger kick, you're gonna be able to control the Alternator in hip fire much easier than the R9. In fact, it's really easy to do. The Volt, on the other hand, whilst it has almost 3 times as much spread in hip fire, because of the lower recoil, it does feel easier to use in hip fire up close. At slightly longer distances, say like 10 meters away, the R9 is actually pretty decent as long as you pull down hard as soon as you start firing. Mid-air accuracy is pretty similar between all three SMGs, but the R9 and Alternator are the superior mid-air weapon. So if you're grappling a lot or jump padding a lot or whatever you're doing, if you're in the air, the Alternator and R9 do come out on top. Now, what about reload times? Well, the Volt has the slowest reload time at 2 seconds, the Alternator is next at 1.9, and the R9 is at 1.8. This makes sense to me, and it pairs well with their bullet velocity stats. This determines how fast a bullet goes through the air, and is a good way of determining which weapons are the best for long-range engagements. All energy weapons in their class have the fastest bullet travel time as well. So the Volt has a 23,500 bullet velocity, the R9 a 21,000 bullet velocity, and the Alternator a 19,500 bullet velocity. What does that really mean? Well, at long range engagements, the Volt is going to be easier to lead shots and there's going to be less bullet drop than both the R9 and Alternator. It's quite a big step up from both of the light weapons. So if for some reason you're using the Volt up to 100 meters away, then I guess there's a good use case for it there, but really you kind of want to be picking up an R301 or a Flatline or something like that, because even just using a 2x at this distance can be pretty difficult. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll definitely be covering the assault rifles in a future video and comparing other weapons. Let me know which weapons you'd like me to see to compare next though. I'll see you all in the comments. Cheerio!